All right, everyone, welcome back to the Crypto and Coffee podcast. Right, and in today's episode, we have a very insightful topic for the founders and co-founders out there. The people that right now want to, really, let's say, look at what they're doing in a startup and really want to know if they should be pivoting or should they stay on course in their startup. Right, so with that being said, just to start, I think like the best thing to really say right now is that the only time you really should pivot is when you really see something that's really trending that is gonna really like break an industry, right? So just to give like a good example of this is just how AI has been incorporated into the modern society as of right now. So you can't really look around and see like that, no startup is not using AI. Am I right, Cordo?
Definitely. I mean, well, I would say there's more to it than that. I mean, it's just one thing to say that there's something really trendy happening and that you're able to capture it, right? I mean, you don't want to abandon a good business model just because you see the new shiny thing right in front of you. So, I mean, normally if you're going to do a pivot, and I think the most important thing to start with is just by saying pivoting doesn't mean you failed, right? I mean, we could look at so many different businesses out there that exist in the way they exist today because they pivoted from something else. And this is the classic example, right? I want to start with this because it's a good story. Human beings love stories. So why don't we start with a little bit of a story? I think we've all heard of Wrigley's chewing gum. We've all heard that. But what most people won't know, and I do have to say that one of the reasons why I know this is because my father would nonstop throw stories like this at me growing up. And when you're growing up, you don't want to listen to your parents. You're like, yeah, yeah, dad, whatever, leave me alone. No one's interested in this, but somehow you manage to remember it and then say the same stories 30 years later, which just proves you turn into one of your parents no matter how hard you try not to. Anyways, so William Wrigley, I think he was junior actually. He started out in the late 1800s as a traveling salesman, going door to door, and he was trying to sell things like soap and baking powder. So every time he would try and sell soap, he used to give away the free baking powder with it just to get people to buy the soap. Turns out people like the baking powder more than the soap. So he started to just sell the baking powder. But to get people to try and buy his baking powder, he started giving out free packs of gum with it. People liked the gum more than they liked the baking powder. So he decided to exclusively only manufacture and sell the gum. And before you know it, you have what it is today, and also, of course, Wrigley Field in Chicago. So, I mean, that's a great example of somebody who pivoted twice just based on what he was seeing from the demand of his customers and what they were actually interested in. So it's not as if he failed. He just read the room properly and figured out what exactly your clients need. And I think most of the best examples of a pivot, businesses pivoting, Shopify is another great example. It's because they built something and they realized their actual business was nowhere near as good as what else they built that people were more interested in. And that's one of the key things I would say for a pivot. I wouldn't like to frame it as, oh, look at that new shiny thing out there. We need to do that. I mean, that to me sounds more like a recipe for disaster. But
So would you say like pivoting is more like adding on to your business per se, or just basically going on a different course?
it's going on a different course. I mean, it could start off as adding on to the business, but normally, especially when you're starting out, simple is better. You don't want to focus on too many things and throw too many darts at once and just see what sticks. I mean, you lose direction that way, and it can get expensive. But it's more what I would say. It's like you've had an initial idea, you had an initial business model, and then usually something else that you did along the way proved to be more attractive to your customers, to your users. And then that's what forced the pivot. Of course, there's other examples of just a completely failed business model that just doesn't work. And then you just try and pivot into something else just to keep things going. But you obviously need to have the skill set, just the resources necessary to do the pivot. I mean, there's many reasons why you would do the pivot. I think isolating the reason why you're doing it is probably the first step.
Okay, noted. So, David, I wanted to ask you a little bit about Symphony and how, you guys move from, let's say, a stablecoin blockchain or stablecoins itself to your AI wallet Aria, right? How did you basically, pivot to that, or basically went on that course? Just give the viewers a little bit of a insightful, I'd say observation or something like that.
Well, the original goal was to build the chain and then build other businesses on top of it. So there were multiple businesses planned in the first place. With that, a lot of those, the underlying blockchain was meant to be a way to connect all of these different currencies that people are going to use for these different businesses. So with the case of a chain, with the case of the wallet, it's not really too big of a differentiator from that. It's not too big of a change. The wallet was a plan that was going to be put in place anyway, and this just shifted from the blockchain over to that. Now, in this case, because there are so many different stable coins, there are a couple of different ways that you can connect those, one being an exchange and another being the wallet itself. Because we have the router, because we have the AI, people can just go from one to another very, very easily. And this effectively connects all of these different currencies in the same way that we were trying to do with the chain, just at a higher level and with effectively more steps. So yeah, there's more activity on it. There's more interest. It does simplify things for other chains as well. So it is nice, but overall, it's a pivot in that we were going over to a different product. But it wasn't in this case a different plan. It was just another aspect of the larger plan that a lot of people didn't really know about.
Okay, so let me ask both of you something, right? As business owners yourself, could you say, like, what are like three milestones, like, just for lack of a better term, three milestones as to when you should be pivoting your idea?
Okay, so number one, I would say first off, it's just when something isn't working, just understanding that the existing business model, something you're doing is just not working. And one problem that we tend to have is what we call sunk costs, right? So the sunk cost fallacy, you're thinking, well, look, I just put all of this money into something and I don't want to just throw in the towel on it and just waste that money. But if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. And you've already spent that money. That money is gone. It is not coming back. It's what we call a sunk cost. So too often we have our behavioral biases that get us like anchored and stuck into something that we firmly believe, and we don't update that belief with new information as it comes in, even though we should be. And part of it is because you're worried about the money and how much you spent already, which is exactly what you can't think of because you've already pretty much spent it. So, is it hard for you at first to pivot? Is it because you spent the money, or is it your ego? And that's the next thing that can get in your way is your ego, just your stubbornness and things like that. So, you've got to be able to tell the difference between giving up too early or just going down with a sinking ship. So you have to really get a firm grasp of reality and see, is the business model working? And if not, well, then try the pivot and, like, where are you going to pivot? Well, you're going to pivot to something that you're supposed to have resources and the skill to do it. So, the accidental success or the accidental pivots tend to be more frequent, where you have, like, a good example again is the Wrigley, or Shopify is another great example, right? Because I don't know how many people know that Shopify actually started, I think it started as like a snowboarding e-commerce site. And what they found was there was no good e-commerce platform out there. All the back ends were terrible. So I forget the founder's name, Tobias, I don't see, he created his own back end. And that proved to be what people were interested in. No one cared about the snowboards, but he had other businesses coming up saying, hey, how did you do this? And then he just started outsourcing it, which is almost what AWS was doing. So these kind of pivots are more frequent like that because you have something already. So if you're the founder and you have these other kind of infrastructure or these other products that you've built into your offering, I mean, the first test is to really speak to your customers and users and see what they really like. I mean, if you're going to pivot, you've got to look for the signs, right? I mean, you have to start looking for the signs of things not working. Let's start with that. Look for the signs of things not working. Do you have 10,000 signups, but 5 users a day? You know, just signs like that, which was almost the kind of thing that I saw with my first business, right? Is like we were getting lots of hits and interest, but no one was signing up to trend profits when we first came out. And, you know, just came to realize, okay, you know, that kind of a business, it's all marketing. It's a hungry monster, that marketing. You have to constantly feed it. And through social media marketing, email marketing, it's like a bottomless pit of money just being spent on very small results. So when you start measuring these metrics and you start speaking to your users, you'll be able to really gauge the success. And if you're not seeing it, well, then you better start getting ready, time to pivot. And that's what I would say is the first step, is you've got to look for signs of stress in the business model, things that it's not working, and then analyzing all of the other things that you're doing and seeing if there's demand for the other products or the other services that you could offer. That would be step one.
Okay. So Dave, what about you? What are some signs that you should start pivoting?
In this case, I would prefer to have more experience where it went exceedingly well. That would be the best indicator that yes, this is the correct information, it's the right track, this is what you should do. I don't really have that. Now, Y Combinator, I wouldn't recommend this, but this is what they do. A lot of different groups in Y Combinator, the way that they do it is they create a business under the most interesting thing at the time, the thing investors are investing in at the time. They create an idea, they mock it up, they throw it through Y Combinator, they get the investment, and then they pivot over to the thing they actually wanted to do. So yeah, it's not a great way of doing things, but that's a way of doing things that gets the investment, and a lot of those businesses work out. So that is a way of doing it. Is it the most moral way? No. Is it a way? Yes. Is there an indicator that that is a way that you can do it and that will work? Absolutely. So yeah, there's one point there. With another, in my case specifically, I was trying to solve a problem that people said couldn't be solved, and when I showed the solution, people said that the solution was too complicated. So yeah, that was a problem. They didn't like that about the business. They couldn't figure out how to solve the problem, but the solution that I came up with, they didn't like it because it was too complicated. They couldn't understand it. So when I come up with the next one, that is much simpler. It's much easier for them to wrap their minds around, and no one's asking me questions about that one. It's like, oh, so you go from this chain to that chain, this crypto to that crypto. Okay, great, I understand it. So it makes their lives easier, and they don't ask questions that they're not going to understand the answers for. So it works very well for me in that. With that, if you have a problem and there's this other thing that will solve that problem, I think that would make for an effective pivot on that, because yeah, you have a problem, solve it. So I'd probably lean towards that side.
Oh, I completely agree. I completely agree. I mean, if you have that ability and you have the resources and the skills, and absolutely. But there's so many examples of when that doesn't happen, right? When you don't have the skills, right? Or maybe you do, you don't know it yet. Maybe you have to buy it, acquire it, hire it, whatever. But I mean, that would be the ideal situation. But that's not always available to everyone, right? I mean, if you could look at other examples, some of the other ones that I'm well aware of. I mean, Nintendo just started off as like a Japanese playing card company, like, starting in the early 1900s. And, that market crashed. Like, people just stopped playing cards, people stopped going to the card parlors. And they tried a number of different things. They tried a taxi service. I think they tried a hotel chain. They tried an instant rice thing. I mean, this is an amazing story, the Nintendo one. Before they realized, with all the electronics coming up, what did they know? They understood toys. They understood the human psychology of entertainment, and they transfer that into chips, into building microchips, into eventually gaming systems. So they didn't really have that expertise right away, but what they did have was the knowledge of what people wanted in that space. So then you can just go out and try, and acquire that expertise. If you don't have it, that's you need money for that. You're definitely going to need some capital and some really good execution skills to make that happen. And then on the other hand, and this is, I think, let's say I'll use the example that Gio was talking about with AI. Okay, everyone's like, it's one thing also to have yourself under threat by new technologies coming out. It's another thing to go complete 180 pivot when you're a shoe company to start buying up infrastructure to make GPUs and offer GPU servers. And I did some research on that. There was a company, I don't know this company, Allbirds. Have you ever heard of this company called Allbirds? No? Okay.
I've watched a couple of videos on them. There's this guy that does really good information, and he brought them up. The shoe company that pivoted over to AI because there's the AI hype, and then their stock price jumped like what, 3 to 5 times.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's pretty much it. So, I mean, in this case, okay, you have a shoe business, and they are selling the assets of the shoe business for close to $40 billion. $40 million. So it's not like nothing, right? I mean, fine in business terms, or even for public corporations, 40 million is nothing. But for for any founder, saying your business is worth $40 million, I think you'd be very happy with that number and that realization. So they're still selling that for $40 million. And then they secured, I think it was 50 million to go into the GPU business. So, I mean, like, that's a crazy pivot. And like that one just terrifies you. You got to applaud the well, the right word is here without being, swearing or anything, but I would say the chutzpah, or just the ability to do something like that, is pretty crazy. So, I mean, that's not a pivot that everyone should be doing.
Mhm. And I wanted to just, I guess go a little bit on the psychological, I guess cost of it, right? So, most people always say that, something is always stupid or always looks stupid until it works, right? So what are your thoughts on, like, for some founders that have like the fear of like starting over, or I guess burnout when, comes to pivoting to like a new idea or just adding on to like their current idea, basically, Cordell, David?
Right, Dave, you go first.
I suppose that really depends because you can, if someone can execute really well on the addition to their idea, absolutely go for it. If that's what's needed, do it. But if in a lot of cases, that's generally ill-advised, and this will come up in various accelerators and incubators that you join, and they all talk about this sort of thing. With that, if you expand into too many things at once, then that's going to be an issue. A lot of people have a lot of ideas and they want to run on all of them all at the same time. A lot of people think that engineering can be done instantly, especially now that AI has come out, and they think, oh yeah, so you can just build this in a day, right? And like, neither of those things are true. You have to be able to prioritize. You have to be able to pick this, then that, then this other thing after those two. If you try to do everything all at once, even just in your day to day, if you need to do the laundry, vacuum the house, clean the windows, and cook your food all at the same time, you're not going to be able to do any of them. You do one, then the next, then the next. I related this to one guy in an analogy. If you're dating 3 women, you have 2 eyes and they look in the same direction. Which one are you looking at first? You have to pick. Like, it very literally is. You have to pick something. Now, a lot of CEOs will say, "Oh, I'm going to look at them all. I want to look at all of them. I'm going to look at all of them at the same time." It's like, no, that's not possible. It's literally not possible. So you have to be able to prioritize. Now, if you have enough money, if you're like Elon Musk, like a lot of people were asking, how does Elon Musk do all these things? He has money. He pays people to do things. That's how he does it all. He's not going out and designing the Teslas, building the Teslas, designing the rockets, building the rockets, designing the AI, building the AI. He's not doing that. He's paying people to do these things. So if you've got money, you can split up the time. Absolutely, go ahead, go for it. If you don't, you have to prioritize. And not a lot of businesses have a lot of money. That's
Oh.
generally not a lot of money for a business. It's a lot of money for a person. So yeah, businesses have to prioritize even when they have millions. So yeah, it's probably not going to go as far as you think. It's probably not going to go as fast as you think. And you have to figure things out and then prioritize based off the information in most cases. For those ones who it'll work out for, absolutely go for it.
Yeah. And I'm happy you brought up the psychology aspect of it, because it's a really important aspect. And I think too many people ignore mental health issues, especially as founders, given how hard you work and how much you're pouring into it in terms of, your personal energy, your passion and everything. So, one, that pivoting can make you feel like you're failing. Pivoting can, it's like you're going in front of your investors, your people, your team, and saying, hey, we worked on this for a while, we're wrong, we have to do something else. That's not a very easy thing to do, right? And you have to be able to talk to people, you have to be able to explain it and get people on board with why you need to pivot. And very often that, when you're starting something and it's not going well, it's going to take a toll on you, right? It really going to take a toll. And if it starts affecting your personal life, that's not a good sign at all. And that probably is a sign you need to make a change. And that would be a sign that maybe the pivot is absolutely necessary if it's actually affecting you personally. So, I mean, that's one thing to think of, is that it will hit you psychologically when what you're building isn't going well, and it's time to pivot. Yeah, I do agree with David. I don't understand why people think humans are. I love it when people tell me they're amazing at multitasking. It's BS. Okay, like, humans cannot multitask. Our brain is not wired that way. We are wired to focus and do one thing at a time. So I hate it when people tell me, "Oh, I'm a good multitasker." That just means you're splitting your attention, and both jobs aren't going to get done well. That's all I hear when someone tells me they're going to multitask. People, "Oh, you're wrong." I'm like, "Oh, maybe," but I will never tell people that I'm a good multitasker. Right? If I'm sending a text message, that is the only thing I can focus on at that time. Don't tell me I can listen to a conversation and send a text message at the same time, because that's not true. I will be ignoring you while you talk to me. So
I wanted to ask, we're just on the topic of, psychology of like pivoting, right? So what do you think about, like, founders that are too early? Because I think that right there takes like a very big mental toll, especially like if you're way ahead of like your time. Like, let's say for instance, like, crypto in like 2014 and like AI in like, I guess, 2020, right? For like most of the startups, or like for most of the people that really saw like the trend before it was the trend itself, could you think that, well, what is like the mental state for that? Or better yet, like, can you survive being too early to pivot?
I think it depends on the person, right? I mean, you really need to have vision and courage at that point. I mean, because you're seeing something that nobody else does, and then at the same time, you need the courage to stick with it when people are telling you you're crazy, when the business isn't working well. So if you're too early, the question then is, okay, when will it be correct, and can you survive until the time where you're going to have customers? I think Amazon is a great example of that, right? I don't know, what year were you guys born in? Like, how old are you guys? Were you guys around in 2000 for the dot-com bust?
Nah, I
Yeah.
wasn't even born yet. I was like, I was born in 2001.
So Dave, what year, how much do you remember of the dot-com bust?
Uh, Not so much about that. I was focused on other things, but I was born in 1989, so like I was
Okay.
like middle school at that time.
Okay. All right. So great. I'm old. That's all we just learned right now. So, not in 2000, I got my first job starting at a mutual fund company on the phones as a customer service representative. As I was doing my CFA exams and hopefully moving towards where I want to be as an analyst and a portfolio manager. So, back then, I can tell you, one, just what it was like to throw a dart in the stock market and make an insane amount of money, which is what it was. You could have invested in a lot of these dot-com businesses or biotech, and it was ridiculous. I mean, my first foray was based on a stock tip from a professor at McGill University. I was talking about a microchip that you can throw DNA samples on, and DNA sticks to itself, and And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. That's brilliant. Like every drug company on the planet is every researcher is gonna need this thing. So I bought shares of the company at $20, hit 300 and something, sold it all, made an insane amount of money. I won't tell you what I put the money in after and how that company did, because that is really not important. Clearly it didn't do well. But, Amazon at the time, selling books online, and I would even walk around telling people, no, I love going into bookstores. I like picking the book up off the shelf and reading it and seeing what and touching it. Nowadays, like, first one, find a bookstore. And, I still actually do enjoy going in there, but they don't have enough books for me to actually generate ideas and find the books that I want. But the point is, like Bezos had to stick with this, right? People saying this is going to fail. It's not going to work. And he's piling money into something that people aren't really using. And now look where it is today. It's not even just an online marketplace. It is an advertising behemoth. It is essentially an advertising company. So when you want to talk about having vision and courage to stick with something, I mean, Amazon is like the classic example of this, because there were years upon years, probably a decade, between the dot-com crash and maybe getting closer to the great financial crisis, where this company did nothing. It's just building and building and building, and now look where it is today. It's like, Amazon, AWS. So it's not easy. I mean, I don't think history has that many people with vision and courage to make it that long during a prolonged, most people do not have the mental fortitude I know I certainly don't, right? I definitely don't. So, I mean, that's the example that I would say, like, vision, time. I mean, you could be looking at a decade. Look at Tesla. Look how long it took for Tesla to finally succeed and gain this kind of acceptance. I mean, you need people like that. How many of us are really like that?
True. Completely agree, David.
No, most aren't. Most people are not like that at all. Most people will give up extremely easily. Most people won't make the attempt in the first place. So the ones that do, yeah, most of them won't continue on for that long. You have plenty of people who will lock onto a new startup, latch onto it, work with it, help it out. Most of those people are going to drop out at some point, and most of those times, those people are going to drop out before it's successful. The ones who do stay in, the ones who do stick around, if the business is successful, great for them. In the case of Amazon, that's an example where he did stick it out for a good while. I would prefer an example where the guy wasn't so well off when he started, but none really come to mind. That's the problem.
Yeah. Interesting. I have to think about that.
Yeah.
No, I would say that the one advice, for our listeners out there that are thinking about starting something or becoming a founder, right? Like the most important asset that you're going to have, number one, is your passion, without a doubt. Okay, like if you're not passionate about it, it's going to be very hard to succeed. You're going to need to eat, breathe, and craft this stuff 12 to 14 hours a day, if not longer, 7 days a week, until something actually happens with it. So you need to love it. The other thing that I would say, is that you have to speak to customers and users immediately. Like, you cannot do anything without getting that kind of intelligence first. And you got to be careful how you do this. You can't just go up to somebody and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? They're all going to say, yeah, that sounds amazing, mostly because they don't want to hurt your feelings, right? You can't, and you can't just go out there and frame it and say, this is what I'm doing. What do you think? So ultimately, and this is the way I would advise people all the time now to gather intelligence is, don't tell people what you're working on. Focus on the problem that they have and what are they trying to do today to solve it. So again, classic textbook stuff here. You're building something, it's supposed to be a solution to a problem. That's simple. That's the textbook stuff. And your first job is to really ask people how they're dealing with that problem today and get the answers and see what they're doing, because this is the information that's going to help shape your business, shape your product, and shape how you're going to interact with your customers. So you only get information. What, how are you trying to solve the problem today? How much money are you spending on it? What are the positives? What are the negative things about what you're doing today to try and solve this problem? That's the way you want to frame it. You don't want to tell people what you're working on, because they're just going to tell you what you want to hear, and that is not going to help you, and then you're going to end up making bad decisions. So speak to your users, but don't tell them what you're working on. Focus on the problem and what solutions they are doing today for that problem and how they feel about it. That would be my main advice for any founder right now. Talk to your customers first, but don't tell them what you're working on.
I think that's great advice. And I just had like a thought, Corey, as you were saying, like, talk to your founder. Like, is there like a difference between like your startup evolving and a startup pivoting? Because like for me, like I know I was thinking just now, and it's kind of like not necessarily the same thing, but there's a difference. There's somewhat of a very small difference there. What are your thoughts?
I would say it has to do with the degree of the evolution or the degree of the change, right? So, for example, when I started Trend Profits with two partners, well, actually, the first idea was to start a financial software company. So, having come from that industry, I realized what a huge problem it was, where most financial advisors and portfolio managers are using 4 or 5 different systems, and each one to accomplish a different task. But ultimately, what financial advisors and portfolio managers needed, was a system that would free up time, that would do a lot more of the analytical work, or help them essentially free up time so they can spend more time speaking to their clients and doing business development. So at first I really wanted to start a software company, but when I was investigating it, we were building it up, it just, then I came up with these investment strategies that I was working on. I realized how good my investment strategies were. I said, well, might as well just try and sell this. So I pivoted. That's a pivot, because I was trying to be a software company and then instead try to sell investment solutions. So it's like almost like a completely different business model. It's a completely different product. You know, terrible business model in the end, like I was explaining about the marketing and being that hungry monster that you're constantly going to have to feed. So that to me was the pivot. But once I started that company with the investment strategies, then it just sort of evolved into doing what I'm doing today, which is much more consulting, working with companies, building investment strategies, whether it's cryptocurrencies or traditional ones, whatever, building AI solutions. It just sort of evolved from the first thing that I was working on, and my skills kept getting better and better at everything, and meeting more people and networking, and then realizing what people really needed. That was just really the evolution. So I would I would say I did one pivot and then some massive evolution, and then just keep finding different companies and different product lines where that need, AI right now. And I can build, like investor relations is a great example of another area I'm investigating right now, that they don't have a lot of good knowledge about what portfolio managers are doing with AI, and they need to adapt so that they make sure that their messages are getting out to the portfolio managers like that. So now there's a big difference. I would say the degree of the change matters, and if it's just a natural progression to where you are versus like a sudden break in something completely different.
Okay. David, what about you? What's the difference between, pivoting and, you start really evolving into something more?
I think that it would be if you change not necessarily the product, but if you change the direction. So if you're working on printers and then you go to printer ink, I'm not so sure that that's a pivot. If you start at printers and then go over to computers, sure. So I don't think that it relies so much on the on just changing, but changing direction, which is why I wouldn't really classify what I did as a pivot. Because in this case, yeah, we're still doing roughly the same thing. Where the goal is the same, try to connect everything. Yet we had to change the product a little bit. People weren't ready for the one; they're ready for the other. So yeah, we had to change that a little bit, but overall, it's the same rough direction. We had roughly the same plans. We didn't look at things and then say, hey, you know what? Why don't we do this other thing instead? That seems like it'll be a better direction. And I think that would be kind of necessary for it to be called a pivot.
Yeah, I think another way to look at it, it's evolution. Like think of it this way: you're under constant assault as a business, right? You've got competitive pressures and you've got technological changes. You could have financial issues, but you're under constant assault that's forcing you to adapt to the circumstances. The degree of that threat and the assault and the degree of your response to it is really what I think is going to dictate a pivot versus just a gradual evolution. So, I mean, and think of it, it just sounds like normal natural selection, right? It sounds like normal evolution to me. There were always two competing theories for evolution. You had Darwin's theory, which was called phyletic gradualism, which things just gradually change over time as environmental pressures change and build. And then you had punctuated equilibrium, where things are mostly stable. And then all of a sudden, a massive shock comes, like an asteroid hitting the planet. And then it forces major adaptation right away. And I think that's actually a really good analogy for business as well, because that's, you're either going to have the constant minor stresses that come that are going to force you to react and move with them, or you're going to have one massive shock that's going to force you to react right away. And that will most likely result in a pivot. So, I mean, we could look at, let's say, the price of oil going up by 40, 50% in a month. That's a kind of massive shock that could pose an existential threat to a business. How are you going to react? Especially if you can't find new resources and new ways to adapt to it, probably going to have to pivot. Whereas if it's just a minor thing, oh, I've got to change suppliers, or I've got a new competitor coming in, making it tougher for me. How do I adapt? That's going to just cause evolution. And yeah, you know what? 20 years of evolution could bring you somewhere completely different from where you started. And I think the Wrigley's is a good example of that one.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to bring back, like, go back to like the psychological side of, pivoting, right? Because, one of the things, like I was just thinking about just now, is that, some people or some, founders necessarily would pivot not because they need it, but just out of fear. And like that fear could come from certain things like, their growth being slowed, they're seeing that, other people are raising money in like their industry. It could be stuff like, social media hype, or maybe even like, the idea is just being too discouraged, or it's not working out for them, right? And I think because of it, sometimes, the anxiousness would create like, fake urgency, right? So is there anything that you would say to like any founders out there like that, David?
I think I'm going to have to think about this one a little bit. Cordell,
Okay.
could you go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's first of all, I think it's a very personal question. I think that everyone is going to react a little bit differently. And I think it'd be kind of wrong to generalize here and say that everybody should be thinking like this. I mean, we're all wired differently. And I think how we respond to the stress is really what matters. So, I mean, like, again, it comes down to your passion, your conviction, and everything like that. But, because I'm guilty of this, you can't be emotional. You cannot constantly like see on LinkedIn or something, oh, somebody else just raised 50 million. And then you feel, the pressure or a failure, because like this is why I constantly tell people like, I should be a chief product officer, chief technology officer, but please don't make me the CEO, right? Please don't make me the CEO, because like you really need someone who's calm, cold, like, a cold, iron kind of thing. If you're going to be very emotional, very reactive, just to everything that you see in social media, which most of the time is misrepresented anyway, I mean, you're probably going to go insane. Okay. And it's not going to be what's best for your business. You really need to find a way to be just level-headed at all times. Don't be emotional and think things through. But at the same time, know when it's time to make the change, when it's time to pivot and things like that. I mean, keeping logs of your milestones, your KPIs, I hate the corporate jargon so much, but keeping logs of this and really assessing where you are in relation to those KPIs is important. And at the same time, keeping an eye on your competitors and where are they in relation to it If you see that you're being outcompeted and you're not going to make it, well, then yeah, it's time to start really thinking about the pivot. But you've got to be objective. You can't be emotional, and that is one of my biggest weaknesses, is that I'm too emotional.
Okay. David, your thoughts?
Well, I probably wouldn't want to be a CEO, but for a different reason. I don't think I could sell anything. So when it comes to that, yeah, you don't want to jump into it emotionally. You don't want to jump into it with yeah, sure, you want a sense of urgency, but you want to think it out. You want to plan it out. Yeah, that all makes sense. That's all absolutely accurate. With that, gathering the information, gathering the numbers, both on your business and then also the wider market, any new trends, things like that. Absolutely, I do think that's a good plan. And anytime I try anything, I always try to gather as much information as possible before I make a decision on it. So, yeah, I think all of that is very, very accurate. And yeah, you don't want someone to think, oh no, the business is failing. We need to change and do something else, anything else. A level of panic is not going to make the best decisions in most cases. So yeah, I definitely think that's all accurate.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. And just to end off, the episode, I wanted to really ask, right? What do you think it really takes for a founder to just really, well, just one last piece of advice from both of you guys, right? What is the one takeaway everyone should go from this episode? What is one takeaway that they should take into going up to when it comes to pivoting, evolving, something like that? One
Keep
key
track.
takeaway.
Yeah, keep track of the successes and keep track of the failures, and be objective about them. That's and do it. Be objective. Don't be emotional about it. But that's one thing, is you got to actually really score the wins, and then score the losses, and then use that to help make good decisions. And I'll just, and I'll even put it to you. I'll even like to do it with a little bit of an example, right? Just to help frame it a little bit. I mean, this podcast is called Crypto and Coffee. Yeah, we've spent 99.99% of our time speaking about crypto and, crypto related or investments. We've never once spoken about coffee. Now, imagine once we decided to spend 10 minutes talking about our favorite coffee brands, where we get coffee, and everything like that. And then we see that our listens and our likes skyrocketed. We got 1 million viral things because of our discussion on coffee. How would we react? Would we change the nature of our podcast? Would we just now become the coffee podcast and abandon the whole crypto aspect? Because our users are clearly trying to tell us something. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing that you need to pay attention to, and that's what's going to help dictate the pivot. Speak to your users. You've got to find out what's working, what isn't objectively, and then decide if what is working is worth the pivot.
Well, my favorite coffee is E from Colombia. It comes in a metal can, and it's very smooth. Now, we're not sponsored, but we can be. With that, yeah, I would think go with. Now, I'm a great investor. I am absolutely a great investor by all metrics. Every year that I was in the market, I outdid the market. I outdid the average guy. I outdid basically every fund. Well, not every fund, but like I outdid the S&P essentially. Those groupings. I'm not remembering the terms for it. Now, with that, if I'm a good investor, but investing in myself didn't do well, one thing that I could think of when looking back is on those points where things changed, would I have cut my investment if this was a company in the market? Would I have changed over to something else? And in a lot of cases, I would. If I'm backing a company and other companies are getting funding, other companies are getting customers, other companies are getting ahead, yeah, I would cut the investment and I would put it elsewhere. And if that company changed, if that company that I had previously invested in had changed and had started gaining success in another way that I also like the story for, then I would throw my money back in on it. So I would look at it as an investment and try to make decisions that way. And that could possibly help.
That's very good advice. It's very good advice. I mean, I think the one other thing I want to add is, and it's important for everyone, I don't care if you're a founder or not, stay humble, okay? Hubris and ego is a killer, all right? And just remember, you put on your pants one leg at a time, just like everybody else. So the second you start thinking that you are so amazing and that nothing could knock you off your throne, that's when normally it's going to happen. Okay, the business world and the market, especially the market, when you start getting cocky, that's when you get kicked so hard. All right, so humility is something, it's a great trait. And it's one of my pet peeves is seeing the egos, and I can't stand it. So just watch out for the ego. You got to stay humble, listen to people around you, and know when to make decisions. That's but easier said than done. And I will add, I have never had a cup of coffee in my life. I am not a coffee drinker. I've had 3 sips, and it was enough for me to know that it's not for me. I could easily drink 2 to 3 liters of tea a day, but I just can't do coffee. I just can't do it.
I completely agree with you, Cordell. I'm not a coffee person. The taste is absolute garbage, in my
But
opinion.
they must have coffee where, like, they must make coffee, like good coffee where you live, right?
It's
No?
all right. I've tried it once when I was younger, and then it was just like, yeah, this isn't for me. I'd rather just have like some tea and sugar, and yeah, that's my kind of thing.
But you also have English family, don't you?
Yeah,
Well, yeah, so well, then it makes sense. So do I. I've got some English. My grandmother's side was English, so I still have the tea genes left over from that. The last thing maybe we'll say is, look, we got someone wearing a Metallica shirt.
mm,
I've got my fish hat on. Gio, you're gonna have to start like supporting your favorite bands at some point during these podcasts, all right? And you might have to do a pivot of Battle of the Bands at some point. We go from heavy metal, Metallica, to jam band Fish, to I don't know what your favorite kind of music is, Gio, but we're gonna have to find a way to pivot to that and maybe I don't know tokenize our musical interest somehow.
yeah. So as we end off this episode, right? We basically touched upon, when is it best for a founder to pivot or when to stay on course, right? So as we end off, I would like the founders out there to really sit down with yourself or sit down with your team, right? And really think, should you optimize vision or should you optimize for survival in your current company? So with that being said, I'm gonna end off the episode this new episode of the Crypto and Coffee Podcast and see you guys in the next 2 weeks.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you soon.
All right.
Thank you.